There's a special kind of silence you only hear on your own land, not the quiet of nothingness, but the kind filled with birdsong, breeze, and the soft crunch of your boots on gravel. That's the peace I'd fought a long time to find. And, as it turns out, the kind of peace some people just can't stand to see you enjoy. My name's Jack Rowan, and I moved out to the edge of Hillstone County about 6 months ago not to escape people, but to reconnect with myself after a couple decades grinding in city construction and raising a family mostly on the fly. I bought a ranch property that had seen better days but had good bones. 10 acres of pasture, a creek winding through the north end, and a small cottage with just enough space for a man and his regrets. See, this land wasn't just a purchase, it was the closest thing to a second chance. And for the first few weeks, that's exactly what it felt like. I'd rise early, repair fence lines, clear brush, mend the barn roof one board at a time, always with my coffee in one hand and a tired but satisfied grin under my hat. What I didn't realize was that this ranch backed up to a neighborhood governed by one of those notorious homeowners associations, the type where power goes straight to folks' heads. And leading that particular charge was a woman named Cheryl Montgomery, though everyone in the neighborhood seemed to just call her the president. She was maybe in her late 50s, always dressed like she was ready to host a charity brunch, and never seen without her clipboard or her tiny designer dog, Muffin. Cheryl had a smile that didn't reach her eyes and a tone of voice that somehow managed to sound polite while still dripping with judgment. The first run-in seemed innocent enough. She approached me at the fence one morning with a sugary smile, welcomed me to the area, and asked if I was planning to maintain a residential aesthetic on my land. I told her, kindly but clearly, that my land wasn't in the HOA, and I'd be maintaining a working ranch aesthetic: tools, trucks, and maybe even a few goats if the season was right. Her smile twitched. Things escalated fast. I started getting letters not mailed, just folded and shoved through the slats of my fence. First it was concerns about VY Sewell disharmony. Then it was unauthorized structures. I assumed she meant the hay shed I was repairing, and eventually, she straight up accused me of operating an unlicensed business when I sold a few restored barn antiques at the monthly fair. I tried ignoring her. I really did. But one morning I came outside to find a citation taped to my truck windshield again. Not a real one. Just an HOA-issued piece of paper threatening fines if I didn't cease active VY ties inconsistent with neighborhood values. Now remember, I wasn't part of the HOA. My property was grandfathered in before the development behind it was even built. But Cheryl didn't care about that. She cared about control. And then came the day everything truly blew up. I had just finished cleaning up after a long weekend of yard work. Sweat still clung to my back, and I had a cold beer halfway to my lips when I saw her standing at the end of my driveway, phone in hand, filming me. Again, I asked what she wanted, and without missing a beat, she said she'd called the cops. For what? I asked, completely dumbfounded. For suspicious active VY tie, she replied, like it was the most OBVYS thing in the world. And possible code V violations. I laughed, then stopped when I realized she was dead serious. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, a cruiser pulled up, and this is where the story takes a turn Cheryl never saw coming. The deputy who stepped out wasn't just any officer. He was my son, Daniel. My eldest. My pride and joy. He'd joined the force a few years back after serving in the Army, and though we didn't always see eye to eye, he'd always had a strong sense of justice. I'd told him about the HOA mess in passing, never expecting him to get directly involved. But here he was. When he stepped out and saw me, his eyebrows lifted in amusement. When he saw Cheryl, still holding her phone and barking about V violations, he stepped right between us. "Ma'am, did you call this in?" "Yes," she said. "That man is operating illegally, and I demand he be cited." Daniel looked back at me, then at her. "Ma'am, this property is outside HOA jurisdiction. I checked the zoning files myself when my dad bought it." Cheryl's face turned the color of an overripe tomato. She stammered something about non-compliance and community rights, but Daniel held up his hand. "I'm going to need to see your ID," he said calmly. That threw her off. "Why?" she demanded. "Because false reporting to law enforcement is a crime. And if you're harassing a civilian on his own land, that's trespassing." She started to protest loudly until Daniel reached for his radio and asked dispatch to start a report. "I suggest you leave," he said. "Now." And for the first time since I'd met her, Cheryl had nothing to say. She turned, yanked poor Muffin's leash, and stormed back to her side of the fence. I stood there, stunned, still holding my beer. Daniel turned and gave me a half-smile. "You good, old man?" "Better than I've been in months," I said. But that wasn't the end of it. The next few weeks were quieter, sure, but Cheryl wasn't done. She just got sneakier. There were drones, actual drones, hovering over my property at weird hours. Then I started getting weird calls from the county inspector's office. They'd gotten anonymous tips about illegal runoff, unauthorized livestock, and even noxious weeds. Every time someone came out, they left with an apology and usually a laugh. But the harassment was nonstop, until Cheryl made her biggest mistake yet. One night, after dark, I caught movement near the barn. I flipped on the floodlights and found two people in reflective vests, no less, poking around the irrigation system. When I asked what they were doing, they claimed they were environmental surveyors sent by the HOA. I knew better. I called the sheriff's office. And guess who showed up? Daniel again. Turned out the two so-called surveyors had no licenses, no IDs, and were both volunteers from Cheryl's HOA committee. She'd sent them to dig up something she could use, maybe even literally. They got cited for trespassing, and Cheryl got a formal warning. That might have been the end, but Cheryl had one more move, and it was a doozy. She tried to file a civil suit claiming that my property was disrupting community harmony and bringing down home values. Her complaint included pictures she'd taken, voice memos, and even statements from neighbors she'd clearly pressured into testifying. I hired a lawyer, a sharp old cowboy of a man who'd dealt with HOA nonsense before. We showed up to court with property deeds, zoning maps, and a letter from the county confirming I was well within my rights. Then Daniel walked in uniform and offered a sworn statement of everything he'd seen. Cheryl's lawyer folded in under 10 minutes. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice. And here's the best part. A few months later, after all the dust had settled, Cheryl put her house up for sale. I heard through the grapevine she was downsizing. Turns out, she couldn't handle being the woman who lost a lawsuit to the guy next door. She moved. A young couple bought her house. They came over with a pie the first week and offered to help me fix the gate Cheryl's drones had knocked over. And me? I still wake up early, coffee in hand, boots on the gravel. Still fixing fence posts. Still at peace. Except now, that peace has been earned. So if you're dealing with an HOA tyrant, remember this: the law is still the law, and sometimes it helps to have a son with a badge. And if you enjoyed this story, or if you've got your own neighborhood horror tale, drop a comment. Let's talk justice, land rights, and how to stand your ground when someone tries to push you off it.